Hi everybody, it's Dr. Klingman. This PowerPoint is being prepared for the students in Nursing 616 in the spring of 2017. The goal here is to help explain different parts of the literature review paper that everyone is writing for their master's culminating project and as part of this class. A literature review is a lot like a head-to-toe assessment of the evidence that's available on a particular topic. There are basically 5 systems in a literature review. There's the introduction, search methods, search results summary, discussion and synthesis of results, and clinical implications and conclusions. The good news is, although the paper is time-consuming and long, you've done about a third of it already in previous assignments. The introduction, that was your clinical question paper. The search methods, you've almost done. You did your search history table, and now all you have to do is write about it in Word format, and there are some examples on how to word that in the syllabus. The search results and summary, most of you have started working on the matrix table, and you've certainly practiced how to write about the results and appraisal of an article in your article appraisals in the quantitative, qualitative, systematic review and meta-analysis, and soon the mixed methods. So you've done or practiced a good part of the paper. Now I've got here the weight of the grade does not correspond to the length of that section, and this is very hard to accept sometimes, but the discussion and synthesis of your results is where you can show your nursing expertise. This is the whole reason you're doing the literature review. You want to find evidence that you can use and apply to your practice. So while you collected the data, and that may have taken some time, what's most important is what you do with it. The rest of this presentation is dedicated to talking about what should be included in each of the different sections of the paper. If you're pretty certain that you know what should be included in each paper, great. Just skip over those slides and don't listen to the audio. The first thing to talk about is the introduction. This is probably on the short side. In our format, APA double-spaced, it's maybe a page or two, could be shorter. It really depends on how much justification you feel is needed to explain why the issue is important. It needs to be focused and on point. You don't have to start with problems of the world and come down to your particular issue. You can focus in on the issue that you're interested in pretty early and provide some supporting data. As I said earlier, you've already done this in the clinical question paper, which is fabulous. So when you're putting this into the introduction of your completed paper, just make sure to update per feedback that we've given you. The introduction has background on the problem, including data and support for why the issue is important, has the clinical question in PICO or other format, and then the purpose of the paper. This can be confused easily with the clinical question. The clinical question is why you're writing the paper, but the purpose of the paper is to review the literature for evidence that's related to the clinical question. It's very important to put in a statement that says that. Next comes the search methods. This is a relatively short section. As I said earlier, you've already done most of this also. The search methods is where you say how you approach the purpose of the paper, and the purpose of the paper is a literature review. So what you want to say in your search methods section is a description of the databases, the search terms, the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and so on and so forth. You will have created a search history chart, which goes in the appendix. Update that for any feedback we've given you along the way. And then in the written part of the paper, you include a paragraph or two that describes in words how the search was done. Here's a little example that's taken out of the syllabus. Yours could be worded differently, but this is the kind of information that you would say in your search methods section. Okay, so you did the search methods section. That's sort of like going to Home Depot and picking out your colors and saying, okay, I want to do this, I need this many gallons of paint. I'm going to paint the bottom half purple and the top half green, and I'm going to paint pictures of the solar system on the ceiling. Okay, so that was your methods, but now comes the results summary, and this is the preparation work. This may be your longest section page-wise. It's maybe also your most boring and tedious and monotonous section to write, because you will have selected you will be selecting 10 articles, and you have to write a summary of each one, a summary appraisal of each one. And like I said, you've practiced that with your article appraisals and some of the other modules. Before you launch into describing each of the 10 articles, though, start out with a brief summary of what was found. For example, I give a sample paragraph here. A total of so many articles were found using the search method outlined above. Of those, 10 were selected for inclusion in this review. And then say how you selected the articles, what criteria you used to select the 10, and then cite them. You may want to cluster them and say, 2 meta-analyses were found, 3 literature reviews were found, 4 cross-sectional descriptive studies, and so on and so forth, and then make a general statement about the overall level of the evidence that's being included in the literature review. Or you might have had a different reason for selecting the 10 that you selected. Anyway, you would start out with a general reason for why the 10 were selected. Okay, after you've given the introduction saying, I did my search, I included 10 articles, I selected them because they were the most recent or the most interesting, or they covered the broadest range of evidence, or whatever reasons you just said, now you're going to give a brief appraisal of each of the 10 articles. This is where you will reference the matrix summary table that you will also include in the appendix. So after you write the little introductory paragraph saying, I'm going to include 10 articles, then you may say something like this: the literature review matrix included in the appendix summarizes these studies. Each article is described individually in this section. The evidence as a whole is synthesized and discussed in the next section. So that way you let the reader know what's coming next. It may be easier for you to organize all 10 of the summary appraisals, somehow alphabetical order by author's last name. Maybe you summarize them, group them by level of evidence. It would be easier to read a section that has some subheadings rather than just, a couple hundred paragraphs on two paragraphs on one article, 2 paragraphs on another, and so forth. So think of some way to make this section readable. For example, here's an example I've given. Each article is described individually. The articles are discussed in order of level of evidence. First, meta-analyses are described, then literature reviews, then cross-sectional descriptive studies, and finally the qualitative study is described. And you'll see here that the order in which I'm writing here is equal to the order in which I talked about the evidence in the previous paragraph. That's really important. Then what you would do is you would make some subheadings and go through your article appraisals individually. For example, if you decided to use level of evidence as your subheadings, which would be pretty convenient, you would then use subheadings after your introductory paragraph in this section for each of the levels of evidence, and make sure the subheadings are in the proper APA format. But say your first one is on meta-analyses, and then you could say, 2 meta-analyses are included in this review, and then say first, authors studied X, Y, and Z, and they found blah, 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 and then you give your critical appraisal of that, just like you would have done on a worksheet. And then you would say second, and then, say what the second meta-analysis did. And then comes the next subheading with systematic reviews and so on and so on. So this should make it easier for you to figure out how to order the articles, and it makes it easier for the reader to figure out where your mind is, and just helps focus the reader on how you were thinking about the articles that you were appraising. So now the results have been presented in just summary format. The next section, the discussion and synthesis of results, is where you get to use your expertise as advanced practice nurses. This section should be long enough to describe the relevant details you found in the evidence, but not overly long. The section should not repeat the summary information that you just gave, but it should talk about what it means, talk about common themes that were found, and that type of information. You might want to start out this section with a general statement about the overall results. For example, you could restate that overall the level of evidence on clinical question XYZ was moderate, with mostly qualitative studies found. However, several themes were noted. Okay, so here you're setting yourself up to describe the clinical implications and utility of the evidence, which will be the last section of your paper. Since all the clinical questions that you have all developed are so different and all really good, it's difficult for me to give you something here that's a generalizable example, but you could maybe start out with something like this. Overall, let's say your clinical question was, what was the effect of music on bedtime, on morning agitation of cognitively impaired older adults? So you might want to start this section with a little bit of a reminder on what the clinical question was. So here I say, overall, music at bedtime was found to have differing effects on morning agitation in cognitively impaired older adults. Several factors seem to be associated with these differences. And then I say what they are. Level of cognitive impairment of the individual, type of music that was played, device used to play the music, and dose of music delivered. If you go back into the module on systematic reviews and meta-analyses and look at some of the discussion sections of those articles, you'll see that different authors chose different ways to sort their results and summarize them by themes. That's just one example. If you're having a hard time with this, please ask your peers or ask your instructors. I think we would be able to help you once we saw your matrix table. So then once you've said what the themes are that you found, this really suggests the use of more subheadings, which again makes the paper easier to read and easier to write actually. So you would have, say, subheadings for each of these things. For example, carrying on with the example I just used, level of cognitive impairment was one of the factors. So then you might say something like, 3 of the studies included described how morning agitation was affected differently by music depending on how cognitively impaired the individual was. Smith and Jones, for example, showed blah, blah, blah. Abbott and Costello noted blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And then you would have a similar subsection for music type, another subsection for playback device, and another subsection for music dose. And just however many themes you had, that would be however many subsections you had. And then it would be really obvious and clear that you had identified different themes in the literature. Okay, now you've shown your stuff. You collected the data, you sorted it by themes, you said what the themes were. Now here's where you really bring it all together as a nurse practitioner and say, what do all these themes mean? What does this mean for how I can use the evidence clinically, and what kind of conclusions will I make? The section could be short. It's probably going to be short, As you move through the program, if you go back and look at the paper, I'm guessing you will be able to make this section longer and more meaningful to you. But here's where you say what the themes and evidence mean to you and what your conclusions are about your clinical question. Ta-da! You've done it. You did a beautiful job with your literature review. You found the data. You analyzed it. You sorted it. And now you're telling me, who knows nothing about your clinical topic, how you plan to use it. You've educated me, the reader. Thank you for that. Great job. So please chin up. Keep going on this. These are going to be fabulous papers. Any questions? Please let us know.